Sweden and Norway are Sweden, Norway, officially the United Kingdoms of Sweden and Norway, or as the United Kingdoms, was a personal union of the separate kingdoms of Sweden and Norway under a common monarch and common foreign policy from 1814 to 1905. Before Sweden accepted Norway's leaving the Union, the states kept separate constitutions, laws, legislatures, administrations, state churches, armed forces, and currencies. The kings mostly resided in Stockholm, where foreign diplomatic representations were located. The Norwegian government was presided over by viceroys, Swedes until 1829, Norwegians until 1856. That office was later vacant and then abolished in 1873. Foreign policy was conducted through the Swedish Foreign Ministry, until the dissolution of the Union in 1905. Norway had been in a closer union with Denmark, but Denmark-Norway's alliance with Napoleonic France caused the United Kingdom and Russia to consent to Sweden's annexation of the realm as compensation for the loss of Finland in 1809 and as a reward for joining the alliance against Napoleon. By the 1814 Treaty of Kiel, the King of Denmark, Norway was forced to cede Norway to the King of Sweden, but Norway refused to submit to the treaty provisions, declared independence, and convoked a constituent assembly at Eidsvoll. After the adoption of the new Constitution of Norway on the 17th of May 1814, Prince Christian Frederick was elected king. The ensuing Swedish-Norwegian War and the Convention of Moss compelled Christian Frederick to abdicate after calling an extraordinary session of the Norwegian Parliament, the Storting, to revise the constitution in order to allow for a personal union with Sweden. On the 4th of November the Storting elected Charles XIII as the King of Norway, thereby confirming the union. Continuing differences between the two realms led to a failed attempt to create a separate Norwegian consular service and then, on the 7th of June 1905, to a unilateral declaration of independence by the Storting. Sweden accepted the Union's dissolution on the 26th of October, after a plebiscite confirming the election of Danish Prince Carl as the new King of Norway. He accepted the Storting's offer of the throne on the 18th of November and took the regnal name of Håkon VII. Background: Sweden and Norway had been united under the same crown on two occasions, from 1319 to 1343, and briefly from 1449 to 1450 in opposition to Christian of Oldenburg, who was elected king of the Kalmar Union by the Danes. During the following centuries, Norway remained united with Denmark in a close union, nominally as a kingdom, but in reality reduced to the status of a province, ruled by Danish kings from the capital Copenhagen. After the establishment of absolutism in 1660, a more centralized form of government was established, but Norway kept some separate institutions, including its own laws, army and coinage. The United Kingdoms are referred to as Denmark-Norway by later historians. Sweden broke out of the Kalmar Union permanently in 1523 under King Gustav Vasa, and in the middle of the 17th century rose to the status of a major regional power after the intervention of Gustavus II Adolphus in the 30 Years' War. The ambitious wars waged by King Charles XII, however, led to the loss of that status after the Great Northern War, 1700 to 1721. Following the breakup of the Kalmar Union, Sweden and Denmark-Norway remained rival powers and fought many wars, during which both Denmark and Norway had to cede important provinces to Sweden in 1645 and 1658. Sweden also invaded Norway in 1567, 1644, 1658 and 1716, to wrest the country away from the union with Denmark, and either annex it, or form a union. The repeated wars and invasions led to popular resentment against Sweden among Norwegians. During the 18th century, Norway enjoyed a period of great prosperity and became an increasingly important part of the Union. The biggest growth industry was the export of planks, with Great Britain as the chief market. Sawmill owners and timber merchants in the Christiania region, backed by great fortunes and economic influence, formed an elite group that began to see the central government in Copenhagen as a hindrance to Norwegian aspirations. Their increasing self-assertiveness led them to question the policies that favored Danish interests and rejected Norwegian demands for important national institutions, such as a bank and a university. Some members of the timber aristocracy saw Sweden as a more natural partner and cultivated commercial and political contacts with Sweden. Around 1800, many prominent Norwegians secretly favored a break with Denmark, without actively taking steps to promote independence. Their undeclared leader was Count Herman Wedel Jarlsberg. The Swedish policy during the same period was to cultivate contacts in Norway and encourage all signs of separatism. King Gustav III actively approached circles in Norway that might favor a union with Sweden instead of Denmark. Such endeavors on both sides of the border toward a rapprochement were far from realistic before the Napoleonic Wars created conditions that caused political upheavals in Scandinavia. Consequences of the Napoleonic Wars. Sweden and Denmark. Norway tried to remain neutral during the Napoleonic Wars, and succeeded for a long time, in spite of many invitations to join the belligerent alliances. Both countries joined Russia and Prussia in a League of Armed Neutrality in 1800. Norway was forced to withdraw from the League after the British raid on the Navy during the First Battle of Copenhagen in April 1801, but still stuck to a policy of neutrality. The League collapsed after the assassination of Tsar Paul I of Russia in 1801. Norway was compelled into an alliance with France after the British preemptive second attack on the Danish navy, the Battle of Copenhagen. The defenseless capital had to surrender the navy after heavy bombardment, because the army was at the southern border to defend it against a possible French attack. As Sweden in the meantime had sided with the British, Norway was forced by Napoleon to declare war on Sweden on the 29th of February 1808, because the British naval blockade severed communications between Denmark and Norway. A provisional Norwegian government was set up in Christiania, led by Army General Prince Christian August of Augustenborg. This first national government, after several centuries of Danish rule, demonstrated that home rule was possible in Norway, and was later seen as a test of the viability of independence. Christian August's greatest challenge was to secure the food supply during the blockade. When Sweden invaded Norway in the spring of 1808, he commanded the army of southern Norway and compelled the numerically superior Swedish forces to withdraw behind the border after the battles of Toverud and Prestbacka. His success as a military commander and as leader of the provisional government made him very popular in Norway. Moreover, his Swedish adversaries noticed his merits and his popularity, and in 1809 chose him as successor to the Swedish throne after King Gustav IV Adolf was overthrown. One factor contributing to the poor performance of the Swedish invasion force in Norway was that Russia at the same time invaded Finland on 21 February 1808. The two-front war proved disastrous for Sweden, and all of Finland was ceded to Russia at the Peace of Frederikshamn on the 17th of September 1809. In the meantime, discontent with the conduct of the war led to the deposition of King Gustav IV on the 13th of May 1809. Prince Christian August, the enemy commander who had been promoted to Viceroy of Norway in 1809, was chosen because the Swedish insurgents saw that his great popularity among the Norwegians might open the way for a union with Norway, to compensate for the loss of Finland. He was also held in high esteem because he had refrained from pursuing the retreating army of Sweden while that country was hard-pressed by Russia. In the Finnish War, Christian August was elected Crown Prince of Sweden on the 29th of December 1809 and left Norway on the 7th of January 1810. After his sudden death in May 1810, Sweden chose as his successor another enemy general, the French Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, who was also seen as a gallant adversary and had proved his ability as an army commander. Sweden seeks compensation for the loss of Finland. The chief objective of Bernadotte's foreign policy as Crown Prince Charles John of Sweden was the acquisition of Norway, and he pursued that goal by definitively renouncing Sweden's claims in Finland and joining the enemies of Napoleon. In 1812, he signed the secret Treaty of St. Petersburg with Russia against France and Denmark. Norway. His foreign policy provoked some criticism among Swedish politicians, who found it immoral to indemnify Sweden at the expense of a weaker friendly neighbor. Moreover, the United Kingdom and Russia insisted that Charles John's first duty was to the anti-Napoleonic coalition. Britain vigorously objected to the expenditure of her subsidies on the nefarious Norwegian adventure before the common enemy had been crushed. Only after his very ungracious compliance did the United Kingdom also promise to countenance the union of Norway and Sweden by the Treaty of Stockholm of 3 March 1813. Some weeks later, Russia gave her guarantee to the same effect, and in April Prussia also promised Norway as his prize for joining the battle against Napoleon. In the meantime, Sweden obliged its allies by joining the Sixth Coalition and declaring war against France and Denmark. Norway on the 24th of March 1813. During his campaigns on the continent, Charles John successfully led the Northern Army at the Battle of Leipzig, and then marched against Denmark to force the Danish king to surrender Norway.